Hi Cece, welcome to week 4 of your timeline hand motions. The song this week starts out with 1000 BC. And when we're doing numbers for at least 1 through 4, we always want to make sure that our hand is facing this way, toward us. Otherwise, some of the numbers can start to look like letters. So the first thing you're going to do is a 1. Make sure that it's facing toward you. 1. And you may remember that when we're going to do 1000, we take 3 fingers for 1, 2, 3 zeros and touch them down onto the palm of our hand. So it looks like this, 1000. After that, we do the letters B and C. B and C. So when we put it all together, we have 1000 BC. Our next card is early Native Americans. I thought that this was war paint, that we were sort of painting onto our faces, but that is not the case. And in fact, some Native Americans really don't like being constantly associated with going on the war path and wearing war paint. No one only wants to be remembered or known for the times when they've had to be violent in their history. There's no one perfect agreed upon sign for Native American. In fact, there are 4 that are very common. But the most common one we're going to use looks like this. We're making the F letter for feathers, and we're moving those feathers from roughly beside our mouth to up here a little higher, sort of on our upper cheek area, close to the ear. I have seen variations. Some people drag all the way from the nose like a piercing all the way to the top of the ear, but the majority of the examples I found online from the actual deaf community have us starting here at the mouth and just a little higher. And it's not so much a drag as it is a tap, tap. So it's early Native Americans. Next we have Israel divides into 2 kingdoms. This refers to something that happened after the death of Solomon. His sons couldn't agree on kingdom administration. In particular, they argued about taxes. I mean, who doesn't have strong opinions about taxes, am I right? Eventually, the disagreements grew so strong that the kingdom was split into 2 parts. Up in the north, we had the kingdom of Israel. And down in the south, the kingdom of Judah. That contained Jerusalem, 2 things with a J, and also the Jewish temple. To create the sign, you could start with our good old trusty sign for Israel, Israel. And for divides, you're going to take your hands and create an X, stacked on top of itself. Divides into 2. And as we know, those lower numbers always have our hands facing toward us, so we're going to do 2. Oh no! For lower numbers, our hands always have to be facing toward us, so we're just going to give a number 2. So the whole sign is, Israel divides into 2 kingdoms. This is one of those ways in which language and culture can be tricky, because this backwards 2 I'm showing you, if given with just the right inflection and movement and emphasis, can actually be quite a rude hand sign in some cultures. Use it with caution. Next we have Homer and Hesiod, the 2 greatest writers of ancient Greece. You've probably heard of Homer because he gave us the Iliad and the Odyssey, 2 very long, epic, memorable tales. The Iliad gives us a story of the Greeks, those mighty Mycenaeans, and the Trojans, and the war between them. The Odyssey is a tale of one of the people who fought in that war, Odysseus, trying to make his way back home across 10 years of adventures. Now, you might not have heard of Hesiod, even though he's a fantastically famous poet. But if you know what I'm talking about when I say the tale of Prometheus, then you've heard of Hesiod, and you've read some of his stories. To create the sign for these 2 fantastic writers, we're just going to do an H for Homer and an H for Hesiod. Easy. Next we have Rome founded by Romulus and Remus. I wanted to teach you the real sign for Rome, which is you make an R and tap your head and about around the bridge of your nose. I think that's the shape of one of those old Roman helmets. But it just takes so long, even just doing 2 little beats, that there's no time for it in the song. So if you can manage it, just give me an R for Rome. And that's crossed fingers. Rome. Next, we're going to do founded. You take 1 strong surface as your ground layer, your foundation here, and then you found it with something strong on top of it. So really quickly it goes, Rome founded. The Roman founding myth is that twin brothers named Romulus and Remus were cared for by a mother wolf in the wilderness and survived against all odds. But then they couldn't survive each other because the 2 brothers fought. Romulus was the winner. He killed his brother, and he went on to found the city of Rome, which is why we call it Rome for Romulus and not Reme for Remus. To create the sign of these two brothers, we're just going to do an R, which is a crossed finger, and another R on this side, Romulus and Remus. So when we put the whole thing together, we have Rome founded by Romulus and Remus. And there's a little bit of room in the song to give it a little bounce. Romulus and Remus, if you feel like it. Next we have Israel falls to Assyria. You might remember that we learned the sign for Assyria way back in week 2, and I mentioned that they were incredibly good at fighting with those bows and arrows. They could even loose those arrows against their enemies while riding on horseback. They were so good at it, in fact, that they defeated the kingdom of Israel. So to create this sign, we'll do our good old Israel as quickly as we can. Israel. For falls, we just take our hands down and do a falling motion. To Assyria. It's that good old bow and arrow. So all together it's Israel falls to Assyria. But nothing lasts forever, Assyria, because our next card in the timeline is Assyria falls to Babylon. You might also remember the sign for Babylon. Maybe some of you are racing to do it before I show you. Remember the Code of Hammurabi, the law. We have a stone here and an L for law, and we twist it around and do the law. That's Babylon. So all together, this one is Assyria falls to Babylon. Next we have Lao-Tzu, Confucius, and Buddha, 3 very famous Asian philosophers. Lao-Tzu might have been a real man, an archivist in the royal court, or he might be several people combined because he existed so long ago and did so many great things within Chinese philosophy that he is now shrouded in mythology. But the name Lao-Tzu is a current honorific in Chinese culture. It means the old master. So if you worked very hard at philosophy all your life in Asia, someday you might be called a Lao-Tzu. Lao-Tzu is often credited with founding Taoism, which some people, you're going to hear them pronounce it Taoism or Taoism, but the correct pronunciation is somewhere in between these two sounds. You sort of mix the T and the D. Taoism? It's a sound that Westerners often find difficult to reproduce, but I'll do my best. Taoism. And Taoism refers to the way or the path, and their fundamental text is the Tao Te Ching, which is credited to Lao-Tzu. Next we have Confucius, one of the great wise sages in Eastern philosophy. Confucius believed that many of the foundational values of the past had been lost, so he sought to bring those back to the people, which is strange to think about when we think of him as having lived so long ago. He's especially famous for little wise sayings or aphorisms. One of them is a lot like the Golden Rule. It says, "Never impose on others what you would not choose for yourself." Wise words, Confucius. Next, we have Buddha, who's depicted many ways in artwork. Sometimes you'll see him as a very chubby, laughing man. Sometimes you'll see him as a thin man, sitting very peacefully, doing some very specific signs with his hands and fingers. The story is that the Buddha began as a man named Siddhartha. Not just any man, a prince. He grew up in a beautiful palace and was surrounded by wealth and privilege, but he decided to leave all that behind and live a simple, meditative life. He meditated so deeply and so faithfully for so long that the story goes that he attained enlightenment and could see and understand the connections between all things. He went on to teach this way to enlightenment, and it's often called the middle way. The idea is that you shouldn't be too desperate for any one thing or too angry or passionate about any one thing, but that you should find a way in everything to give your life some moderation and some stillness. We're going to repeat the same sign 3 times for these 3 wonderful philosophers, and that's just the sign for P. You might remember that the letter K is sort of a peace sign with the thumb touching the finger. If you just flip that upside down and point it downward, that's a P, philosopher. And since philosophy has so much to do with the mind, we're going to take that P and float it around our minds. And we're going to do it once for each of the philosophers. So it looks like this: Lao-Tzu, Confucius, and Buddha. Ready to see it all put together? 3, 2, 1.
1000 BC, 1000 BC, early Native Americans. Israel divides into 2 kingdoms, Homer and Hesiod. Rome founded by Romulus and Remus. Israel falls in Assyria. Assyria falls to Babylon. Lao-Tzu, Confucius, Buddha.
Okay, here we go.
Timeline, this is my timeline. Timeline, this is my timeline. Timeline, timeline. We'll start at the beginning of the ages. Age of ancient empires, creation to circa 450 AD. Creation and the fall, the flood and the Tower of Babel, Mesopotamia and Sumer, Egyptians. 3000 BC, 3000 BC. Indus River Valley civilization, Minoans and
Mycenaeans.
7 wonders of the ancient world, patriarchs of Israel. 2000 BC, 2000 BC, Hittites and Canaanites, Kush, Assyrians, Babylonians, China, Shang Dynasty, Hinduism in India, Phoenicians and the alphabet, Olmecs of Mesoamerica, Israelite exodus and desert wandering, Israelite conquest and judges, Greek dark ages, Israel's united kingdom. 1000 BC, 1000 BC, early Native Americans. Israel divides into 2 kingdoms, Homer and Hesiod. Rome founded by Romulus and Remus. Israel falls to Assyria. Assyria falls to Babylon. Lao-Tzu, Confucius, Buddha. Judah falls to Babylon. Temple destroyed. Babylon falls to Persia. Jews return and rebuild the temple. Roman Republic, Golden Age of Greece, Peloponnesian Wars. Persia falls to Alexander the Great. India's Mauryan Empire, Mayans of Mesoamerica, Punic Wars, Rome conquers Greece. Roman dictator Julius Caesar,
Caesar Augustus and the Pax Romana.
John the Baptist, Jesus the Messiah. Year 1 AD, year 1 AD, year 1 AD. Pentecost and the early church. Persecution spread the gospel. Herod's temple destroyed by Titus. Diocletian divides the Roman Empire. Constantine legalizes Christianity. India's Gupta dynasty. Council of Nicaea, Augustine of Hippo. Jerome completes the Vulgate. Visigoths at Rome. The Middle Ages, circa 450 to circa 1500. Council of Chalcedon, Western Roman Empire falls to barbarians.
500 AD, 500 AD. Byzantine Emperor Justinian.
Benedict and Monasticism.
Africa.
Franks defeat Muslims at the Battle of Tours.
Golden age of Islam. Ooh.
Vikings raid and trade, Japan's imperial.
Charlemagne crowned Emperor of Europe. Alfred the Great of England.
Eric the Red and Leif Erikson,
Norse explorers. Vladimir the First of Kiev. Byzantine Emperor Basil the Second. 1000 AD, 1000 AD.
East-West schism of the church, Norman conquest and feudalism in Europe, the Crusades in Zimbabwe and early Mali in Africa, Aztecs of Mesoamerica, Francis of Assisi and Thomas Aquinas, Japan shoguns, Incas of South America.
Genghis Khan rules the Mongols. England's Magna Carta. Ottoman Empire. Marco Polo's journey to China. The 100 Years' War and Black Death. The Renaissance. China's Ming Dynasty. Age of exploration, circa 1400 to circa 1600. Prince Henry founds School of Navigation, slave trade in Africa. Gutenberg's printing press, Songhai in Africa. Tsar Ivan the Great of Russia, the Spanish Inquisition. Columbus sails to the Caribbean. 1500 AD, 1500 AD. Age of absolute monarchs.
circa 1500 to circa 1800.
Protestant Reformation. Spanish conquistadors in the Americas. Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion. Council of Trent. The Baroque period of the arts. Japan's isolation. Jamestown and Plymouth colony founded. Age of Enlightenment, circa 1650 to circa 1800. Hudson's Bay Company, first great awakening. Classical period of the arts, the 7 Years' War. Age of industry, circa 1760 to circa 1969. James Cook sails to Australia and Antarctica. American Revolution and General George Washington. Madison's Constitution and the Bill of Rights. French Revolution, Second Great Awakening. Louisiana Purchase and Lewis and Clark Expedition. Napoleon crowned Emperor of France. Liberation of South America. The War of 1812, the Missouri Compromise. Immigrants flock to America. The Monroe Doctrine, romantic period of the arts.
attention.
Marx publishes the Communist Manifesto.
The Compromise of 1850 and the Dred Scott decision. U.S. restores trade with Japan. British Queen Victoria's rule over India. Darwin publishes
The Origin of Species.
Lincoln's War between the states, reconstruction of the southern states, dominion of Canada. Otto von Bismarck unifies Germany. Wars in Africa, the Spanish-American War. The Progressive Era, Australia becomes a commonwealth. Mexican Revolution, World War I and President Wilson. Lenin and the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. U.S. evangelist Billy Graham. Modern period of the arts, the Great Depression and the New Deal. World War II and President Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Stalin of the USSR and the Katyn Massacre.
The United Nations formed. The Cold War. Gandhi and India's independence. Jewish state established. Mao and communist victory in China. North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The Korean War.
Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement.
Jim and Elizabeth Elliot, missionaries to Ecuador, the Antarctic Treaty, the Vietnam War. U.S. astronauts walk on the moon.
On the LNP. Yeah.
Age of information and globalization, circa 1970 to the present. Watergate, President Nixon resigns.
The best is au revoir.
Fall of communism in Eastern Europe. European Union formed. Apartheid abolished in South Africa. 2000 AD, 2000 AD, September 11th, 2001.
Our fellow citizens are waiting.
Rising tide of freedom, rising tide